Back again for another video. So, on this video, we will be talking about a woman's ego and pride for women. So, ego. Ego is something that is rooted in one's perspective of themselves compared to the rest of the world. It is something that can be falsely obtained, such as having pride in something you are not, having a esteem that does not represent the reality of your existence properly, or a belief in oneself that is true or untrue. It is very subjective where the ego comes from. Pride itself is the esteem behind a aspect of life. Sometimes this is earned, sometimes it is not. But ego and pride are like cousins. They're not one and the same exactly. They tend to show up at different times. When someone is prideful, soon after does ego show up. Or, when someone shows their ego, soon after does pride show up. But they rarely show up at the same time, though they can. But in women, this is a downfall for them because they don't have the proper tools to be able to wield them correctly. If you know anything about the Bible, Proverbs 31 describes a woman. Actually, I'll read a little bit from it. Just give me a second here. Now, every woman wants to be, anyone who knows about Proverbs 31, anyways, they want to mimic themselves behind it and say, oh yes, I'm a Proverbs 31 woman. But to be honest, I don't think a lot of them have ever actually read it. It is, or they may have, and it came from a different interpretation. So it gives this light of women very differently than what the King James Version has said. But there's also something very important that men should pay attention to that is said in this chapter, rather. It says, Proverbs 31:3. It says, "Give not your strength to women, nor your ways to that which destroy kings." This is something that I profess a lot on my channel, that we should not be giving our power to women, because these things can destroy you, because this has happened plenty of times before. I mean, look at Caesar, right? Look at a lot of men who gave their power to women. I talked about Samson in a previous video as well. He gave his power to a woman, and he was ultimately destroyed as a result. Nonetheless, it was my belief that this is the path that God wanted him to go down, so that he can be an example, and so that he can do what he was put there to do. But nonetheless, it still remains that he gave his power over to a woman, and that was his downfall. But let's get to the Proverbs 31. And for anyone who doesn't believe in the Bible per se, that's totally fine. I'm not here to discuss the validity of what is said. I'm just here to pivot off of what women often say to men in regards to how they see themselves and how they view, I guess you can say, their pride and esteem about themselves when compared to the Proverbs 31 woman. Right? They say that they're much like them and that they do the same things, and they the Christian woman anyways. So let's go over it. We're going to start at Proverbs 10, Proverbs 31 and 10. This is from King Lemuel. So he's talking to his sons, and he's discussing what a woman is. So anyway, Proverbs 31 and 10. Who can find a virtuous woman? for her price is far above rubies, a virtuous woman. This is how it starts off. It starts off with virtue. Pride isn't a virtue. Ego is not a virtue. So let's move on. The heart of her husband does safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works willingly with her hands. She is like the merchant ship. She brings her food from afar. She rises also while it is yet night and gives meat to her household and a portion to her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands she plants a vineyard. She girds her loins with strength and strengthens her arms. She perceives that her merchandise is good. Her candle goes not out by night. She lays her hands on the spindle, and her hands hold the staff. She stretches out her hands to the poor. Yes, she reaches forth her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. She makes herself covering of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes fine linen and sells it, and delivers girdles to the merchant. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. She looks well to the ways of her household, and eats not the bread of idleness. Her children arise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done virtuously, but you excel them all. Favor is deceitful, and beauty is vain, but a woman that fears the Lord shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. So that was Proverbs 31, 10 through 31. And like I said, a lot of women like to describe themselves as that. But let's go over a few things of what was said. Proverbs 31 and 12. She will do good and not evil all of her days, all of her life, excuse me. Think about that. Does pride sound like good all the time? Does ego sounds good? Not really. Let's move on to Proverbs 31 and 26. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. How many of these women who you run across who claim to be Proverbs 31 have very disparaging things to say about people? This is the law of kindness that they're talking about here. A law of kindness, meaning that she dictates how to carry oneself in kindness. She's an example. What she says is an example of kindness, and the rules that should be followed by what she says, how she carries herself. And then it also says she opens her mouth with wisdom. A lot of these women who talk very harshly in the first place about other people rarely have anything to impart to anyone that's worth anything. I often wonder, once again, how can one be prideful over something that doesn't relate to the reality of things? Women are very out of touch with the reality of who they are versus the reality of who they believe to be. They are two different things. Who they believe themselves to be, rather. They are two different things. I see this very often. I see this all the time. It's nothing new to me. So it kind of, I think a lot of men are used to seeing it, so they don't check it as much because it's not shocking anymore. But I think that it's something to be paid attention to, that these women see themselves in such a way that does not relate to the reality. Therefore, they have the false pride, and therefore they have the false ego. It comes from the perception of themselves that's not real versus the actual truth of who they are. You have to keep that in mind. So let's move on. Let's find another one real quick. There was another one that I wanted to highlight real quick. It was Proverbs 31:12. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. All the days of her life. Her husband, she will do him good all the days of her life. These women, they can't even show that they have a good relationship with people from day to day. So how are they going to have, not from day to day, but from sparingly, like they don't hang out with these people all the time. How are they going to have a good relationship with someone up close day to day, all the days of their life? How can these women who claim to be Proverbs 31 women claim that they will be a Proverbs 31 woman to their husband when they become married if they don't have proof in their history of doing such with just regular people who are not that important? How? Once again, this is all based on how a woman sees herself rather than what the reality of the circumstances tell. The pride, the ego, this is what gets in the way of a woman understanding that she is not a Proverbs 31 woman. Like I said, I don't think many of them have actually read it. I talked about Proverbs 31 woman before in previous videos of how everything that she's doing that has been described in the text, she's not doing it for herself. Notice, not one thing was done for herself. Everything was done for her husband and her household. That's it. It didn't describe any selfish acts whatsoever. But yet these selfish women claim to be Proverbs 31 women. It's very interesting. This is what a virtuous woman looks like. A woman who actually stands on virtue, but more specifically, a woman who shows that she can sacrifice for the greater good of her household without herself being included. It's very hard for women to separate themselves from the crowd and sacrifice themselves for the crowd, and especially their husbands. Their children, it's not so hard for them to do that sometimes, but it's becoming very apparent that some women just can't do that. But for the most part, women can sacrifice for their children, whether it be the right or the wrong way, but they can do it. But for them to sacrifice for their husbands, that's a person outside of their understanding, their family, their immediate family. That's just a guy that she met and happened to become married to. Women oftentimes separate themselves from their husbands. They don't view them as necessarily family, right? Not like men, like how we view our wives as family. They don't view us as family. They view us as a husband, which is a placeholder. It's not a, how can I put it? It's not something that is hard set in stone. Like, for instance, their father will always be their father. Their mother will always be their mother. Their children will always be their children. But you, as their husband, that may not always be so. So they don't necessarily view you as the same way as they view those other genres of family. So you're not necessarily considered family in the way that you think. So starting from that point, for these types of women who claim that they are Proverbs 31 women, they don't seek to please you as they would these other people. They don't seek to put their necks out as they would these other people, because they view you as disposable. They view husbands as disposable. Why? Because once again, that is a title that can be stripped away from you by her hands. So she believes anyways. So therefore she believes that you're temporary, because there's no place in society that says that this has to be a permanent thing. Once you accept him as your husband, he is that for life. There's no place in society right now, in our society anyways, in American society, where a woman is held firm to her decisions. And now you have to accept this man as your forever. So she views you as disposable well before she even meets you, most of them. So these are pretty much my talking points against these women who claim that they're Proverbs 31 women. Because if they were, they would have a history of showing these things well before they met you. A lot of them, they don't. And like I said, many of them, they probably have never even read this. But I guess this is where they'll remain. They'll remain in the fixation of what they believe rather than what the truth actually says and what the reality actually says. And they'll come to a harsh truth and reality that they've been trying to avoid probably. But nonetheless, like, comment, and share. Check me out on Facebook. Check me out on Patreon. Actually, this is going on Patreon. But until next time, this has been the Wolf in Beta Clothes. May you have a good day, and peace be with you.